What if your most cherished dreams were extinguished by a regime that feared even the softest whisper of dissent? Fyodor Dostoevsky, born in 1821 into modest circumstances in Moscow, once harbored a quiet ambition to become a teacher, to illuminate young minds with the power of knowledge. His early years were a study in contrasts. His father, a devout adherent to the prevailing state ideals, and his mother, a gentle schoolteacher, nurtured in him both a rigorous discipline and a deep love of learning. Yet, as he matured, his restless curiosity drove him towards ideas that challenged the status quo. Drawn to the radical debates of the Petrushevsky circle, Dostoevsky found himself among a small, courageous group of intellectuals who dared to envision social reform. The circle, comprising reformers who advocated for progressive ideals such as the abolition of serfdom and greater freedom of expression, represented a bold challenge to the autocratic Tsarist regime. In a time when free thought was not only frowned upon but brutally suppressed, these discussions were deemed dangerous. Their progressive ideals were seen as subversive, threatening to upend the rigid social order and weaken the absolute power of the state. In 1849, as the climate of fear and suspicion intensified, Dostoevsky's association with these reform-minded radicals led to his arrest on charges of sedition, specifically for subversive ideas and dissent against autocracy. The trial that followed was not an honest search for truth, but a grotesque performance. A state-engineered spectacle intended to intimidate and silence any who dared challenge the established order. The courtroom was less a forum for justice than an instrument of terror designed to break the spirit of free thinkers. Recalling that fateful moment in his memoirs, Dostoevsky once reflected, "I felt as though the very light of my soul was being extinguished before my eyes." In that instant, the gentle dreams of a future in the classroom were violently upended. Standing before a court that was merely a puppet of state power, he experienced the shattering of his youthful aspirations. It was in this crucible of injustice that the seeds of profound personal transformation were sown. A transformation that would, in time, not only redefine his own destiny, but also alter the course of Russian literature forever. Imagine standing at the threshold of oblivion, your heart hammering as you advance toward what appears to be your final moment, only to have that moment cruelly subverted by a calculated deception. On a bitter December morning in 1849, under the cold orders of high-ranking Tsarist officials and secret police, whose mission was to instill terror in any dissenters, Dostoevsky was marched to the firing squad. The soldiers, instructed to maintain a rigid, unyielding formation and to recite their commands in a monotone void of compassion, advanced with meticulous precision. Every measured step towards the line reinforced the certainty of death, and the oppressive silence in the execution ground was as palpable as the chill in the air. Just as the fatal moment loomed and the mechanism of death seemed poised to act, an abrupt command, uttered through a terse signal that echoed over the assembled ranks, shattered the grim proceedings. The execution was, in fact, a mockery. This calculated ruse, designed not to claim his life but to break his spirit through the sheer terror of facing death, left Dostoevsky suspended between oblivion and reluctant relief. In that agonizing instant, as the soldier's stony expressions gave way to a surreal announcement, he felt a terror so profound that he later recalled in his memoirs, "I felt as though the very light of my soul was being extinguished, only to flicker back in the darkness." Such psychological tactics, now understood as a notorious tool of Tsarist repression, were intended to serve as a dire warning to others who might challenge the regime. Yet, rather than shattering his will, the mock execution forced him into a deep, wrenching introspection. It was a moment rife with bitter irony. The state's effort to crush his spirit instead ignited within him a quiet but unyielding resolve to confront the depths of human suffering and ultimately transform that terror into a well of creative insight. The orchestrators of this macabre performance remain shrouded in the veils of history, a reminder of the shadowy figures within the Tsarist hierarchy who wielded cruelty as a tool of control. Their exact identities may be lost, but their intent is clear: to silence free thought and to reduce dissenters to broken, haunted shells. In that fateful moment, as the mock execution dissolved into a grim tableau of state terror and psychological manipulation, Dostoevsky's inner world was irrevocably altered. The memory of that false death, with its lingering scars and unanswered questions, would become the crucible for his later transformation. A transformation that would echo through the pages of Russian literature for generations to come. After the harrowing mock execution, Dostoevsky's fate took a dramatic turn as he was exiled to the unforgiving expanse of Siberia, a punishment whose daily realities were as merciless as they were transformative. Stripped of the familiar streets of St. Petersburg, he found himself in a bleak prison camp where winter was not a season, but a ceaseless state. Temperatures often plummeted well below -30 degrees, and each day unfolded with a rigid routine, waking before dawn, enduring long hours of forced manual labor in biting, wind-lashed conditions, and subsisting on paltry rations that barely quelled hunger. The harsh environment was further compounded by inadequate clothing that left his body exposed to the merciless cold, and the ceaseless howls of the wind seemed to echo the collective despair of all who were confined there. In this frozen wasteland, Dostoevsky was not alone in his suffering. He witnessed firsthand the profound misery etched on the faces of fellow prisoners, men and women whose silent endurance spoke volumes of shared human affliction. One particularly searing memory, recorded in a journal entry dated January 15, 1850, recounts how he sat huddled with a gaunt elderly inmate who whispered about his lost family. A moment of intimate human connection amid overwhelming isolation. Such encounters gradually chipped away at the barriers of self-preservation and awakened in him a deep empathy. He began to see suffering not as an abstract trial, but as a lived, unifying experience that bound all people together. Every grueling hour, each shoveled mound of frozen earth, and every night spent in the cramped, barren cell, forced Dostoevsky to confront the stark realities of life. The severe conditions stripped away any illusions of civility, revealing instead a world where every man's pain was palpable and every small act of kindness a quiet rebellion against despair. In the long, dark Siberian nights, as he recorded his reflections in meticulously dated journal entries, he slowly discovered that the capacity for human compassion often emerges from the depths of shared adversity. Here, amid the isolated, icy silence, his soul was gradually reshaped, and the seeds of a profound empathy were sown. An empathy that would later become the cornerstone of his literary genius. Emerging from the bleak isolation of Siberia, Dostoevsky underwent a metamorphosis that was as paradoxical as it was transformative. The endless, frigid nights and punishing labor had not broken his spirit. Instead, they ignited a fervent desire to transmute his personal agony into a language of redemption and insight. In the quiet solitude that followed the brutal years of exile, his inner torment began to coalesce into a powerful creative force. His private journals, filled with candid reflections, precise dates, and raw, unfiltered observations, became the crucible in which his new literary voice was forged. This transformation found its most vivid expression in his magnum opus, Crime and Punishment. The tormented inner life of Raskolnikov, characterized by moral ambiguity, crushing guilt, and the search for redemption, mirrors Dostoevsky's own gradual awakening. It is an irony of fate that a man once condemned to die, whose soul was nearly shattered by a mock execution and the harsh solitude of Siberian exile, should emerge with a vision that redefined the very essence of human suffering. Scholars like Joseph Frank have noted that Dostoevsky's writings are imbued with an authenticity that stems directly from his experiences in those silent, punishing hours. A turning point in his creative rebirth came on a long winter's night when, in the flickering candlelight of his cell, he penned a journal entry that captured the essence of his inner struggle. A moment when the overwhelming silence of exile seemed to speak whispering truths about the nature of guilt, suffering, and the possibility of redemption. Such reflections not only transformed his own destiny, but also laid the groundwork for a literary legacy that continues to resonate. His work teaches us that the harshest trials can give rise to the most profound insights, and that even in the depths of despair, the spark of creativity can illuminate a path to redemption. Thus, in the transformative crucible of exile, the very silence that was meant to break him instead became the voice of his creative genius. His journey from a condemned intellectual to a master chronicler of the human condition stands as a powerful reminder. Even in our darkest moments, there exists the potential for profound renewal. A legacy born not of unyielding despair, but of the resilient, unspoken whispers that guide us towards redemption.